Everyone loves a good story, a story that transports us, that transcends space and time, stories that speak the universal language of humanity, that crosses borders and boundaries and creates connections, stories that make us laugh, cry, scream, ache, stories that slice inside us and excavate the deep truths that are hidden there and brings them to light. Stories are powerful, and stories teach powerful lessons. I am a student of story. I am a writer. And over the last year, I've had the biggest education of my life. I wrote my first novel. It was one of the most stretching seasons I've ever endured, full of many midnight moments, those bleak and hopeless times when I questioned the worthiness of my pursuit, the value of my message, and if I would even survive the process. But there were many, and likely more, moments of sweet, bright revelation, where in the creation and study of story, I stumble upon a truth that's bigger than my story and bigger than myself. Now, one such truth may at first seem dark, but it's one that's too important to ignore, and embracing it has brought me hope. And the truth is, I am a villain. And this is my story. I'll give you guys a breather from the scary face. So I compare writing a novel to getting an education, but it's less like kindergarten and more like a crucible. Because story is not a very kind teacher. She doesn't hold hands or gently affirm you along the way. She's like an ancient warrior that drops you in the woods, arms you with a knife, and tells you to find your own way out. She makes you wander through the trees, circling back around that same spot over and over and over. And when you do get something right, like the perfect line of dialogue or an amazing twist in the plot, or you finally slay the beast of self-doubt and actually share your work, you hoist your arms to the sky and scream in victory. Story looks up from her book, takes a sip of tea, and gives you a single pleased nod. She doesn't know about my love language or care. So I'm writing my novel, and I'm also a stay-at-home mom of 3 kids, 2 things that don't easily coexist with one another. They're in constant conflict, pulling me in opposite directions, sometimes from the inside out. Because, writing a novel doesn't just happen when you're sitting in front of a computer. It's always happening. Your brain becomes so invaded with characters that, the brain cells that aren't, keeping you alive and breathing are over here immersed in the story. And it's awesome and exhausting and impossibly hard to balance with the needs of everyday life, like showering and feeding your kids. By the way, this is like the most put together I've been in a year, and it feels really weird to be wearing makeup, a real bra, and something that is not yoga pants. Pursuing the deeply internal process of writing a story with the extreme extroversion of 3 kids ages 6 years and under can get a little bit crazy. At our house, there's many a day when we have clicked, yes, we're still watching on Netflix 3 too many times, and we haven't made it to the grocery store in a while, so the kids and mom are melting down because our favorite beverage isn't in the fridge. And I'm all work, they're all play, and together we create a critical mass for an epic finale that could rival The Shining. That's when our family goes for a drive. I load the kids up in the van, I throw a visual story on the DVD player, and I pray that 1 out of 3, maybe even 2 out of 3, will fall asleep, and mommy can get some much-needed story time. The day I discovered I am a villain was one of these days. So we're driving, and I'm thinking about my story, and I'm blocking out the dialogue of Ice Age that I now know by heart. And I'm thinking about a character, specifically a bad guy in my story, and I'm thinking about why he's coming across as more like a cardboard cutout and not this 3-dimensional, real person that I need him to be. And in this moment, I remember a quote that I had read by George R.R. Martin. Nobody is a villain in their own stories. We are all heroes of our own stories. And then it happened. It was like a curtain being pulled back from my mind, and I saw a truth, not about my story or this character, but about my real life and the world around me. We are all heroes. The villains in my life are the heroes of their own stories. But if they're heroes, what if I am a villain in someone else's story? I am a villain. And from that moment, I saw things differently. Revelation is like that. It can happen in an instant, often out of nowhere. And suddenly, you see something you can't unsee, and you know something you can't unknow, and it changes you, and you become accountable for what you know and what you have seen. We are all heroes. Think about it. In a story, a hero is the main character, the one we follow along on their journey. We get to know them, we care about them, we root for them, we want them to win. But it's not because they're perfect. Far from it. Our favorite heroes, full of flaws. Those are the ones we really like because we can relate. So think about your favorite stories, a book or a movie, and think about the hero. Were they perfect? Luke Skywalker, he's known as being a little bit whiny, a little impatient. In Iron Man, Tony Stark, we all know him as a total narcissist. The Hunger Games, Katniss Everdeen, she's a little bit frosty, not really a people-y people person. But we don't care. We love them just the way they are. They're heroes. Think about some of your favorite people in real life. Are they perfect? Do you love them anyway? What about strangers? Are you a little less forgiving with their flaws? There's something about knowing someone, about closing that distance between our eyes and our hearts that makes us care about them and makes us not only forgive their flaws, but celebrate them. Strangers are just heroes you don't know yet. So in a story, the hero has a goal that drives the story forward. And it could be anything. Save the world, get the girl, get a glass of water. And we don't care what it is as long as there's believable motivation. And this motivation comes from backstory. So backstory, as I'm sure you're familiar with, is everything that happened before the story began. It's everything in history, from the beginning of time forward, their ancestors' lives forward, their own life forward. It's everything that influences them. Events, personality, nature, nurture, all of it. So think about your own life and your own backstory. What sort of things motivate you or shapes you? Influences your goals. What gives you your why? So, story. We've got a hero, they've got a goal, they go after it, they get the goal, the end. Right? No. In a story is not a story without conflict. Enter the villain. So the villain, or the antagonist, is the opposing force. It's the one who gets in the way of the hero reaching their goal. But it's not some arbitrary thing. It's because the villain also has a goal. It just happens to be in direct conflict with the hero's goal. The two goals oppose one another and create this conflict. But even the villain has to have a why behind their goal, a why that comes from backstory. Now, an author is the gatekeeper of that backstory, and they'll sprinkle in bits and pieces of backstory as the story requires. But the author knows way more about a character and their backstory than the reader or viewer ever gets to know. J.R.R. Tolkien wrote The Lord of the Rings and entire anthologies of history for Middle-earth, and J.K. Rowling has the entire Pottermore website dedicated to all of that cool extra stuff that she knows about the Harry Potter world. There is always more, so much more to a character than just what is on the page. So, often what you get to find out in a story comes down to point of view, the vehicle through which the story is told. And you can see how, depending on which character is telling the story, greatly influences how we experience the story, what we learn, think, and feel. Point of view determines how we perceive the heroes and the villains to be. There's been some cool recent movies and stories retold from the villain's perspective, right? Like Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty, or Wicked, which features the Wicked Witch of the West, or one of my favorites, the show on ABC, Once Upon a Time. That's a great, great show for seeing villains and heroes and all the intricate backstories. We love these movies and these different ways because they show us these characters in a whole new way, and now these characters, we get to know them, we care about them in a new way, and they become heroes. Nobody is a villain in their own story. We are all heroes of our own stories. The villains in your life are the heroes of their own stories, with huge, complex backstories, so much more than you can see on the page, that motivates them, shapes them, gives them their goals, just like you. Think of someone that you love, someone that you know better than anybody else, and think of everything that you know about them. But then think, how much more is there to know about this person? How much more doesn't show up on the page? Now, go ahead. Think of a villain in your life. Someone who has gotten in the way of your goals, created conflict for you, who has wronged you, maybe even hurt you. Try to read their story with them as the hero. What do you see? What's their motivation, their goals? What has influenced them in their backstory? Can you see them any differently? Do you feel yourself resisting even to try? Now, flip it back on yourself. If the villains in my life are the heroes of their own stories, what if you are a villain in someone else's story? We are all villains. And when this happened to me in my van, it was shockingly not hard to think of instances and times in my life where I had been a villain. They were crystal clear in my mind. Moments with my family, with my mom growing up, as adults, with my husband, definitely with my kids. And then, what about the other people I've interacted with in my sphere? What about strangers? And then my mind went bigger and further. What about people of other races? What about people of other languages? People of other sexual orientations or nationalities? People of other religions? People of other belief systems? And I realized it's so much easier to be a villain when someone is other than me. It's so easy to get caught up in our own stories, so focused on our own goals and pursuits that we become blind to the adversity we cause in the stories of others. How has our own ignorance or apathy or denial made us villains? If you read the story of your life from another character's point of view, what do you see? Can you see where you have been a villain? Are you still? I hear the cries of defense in my own heart. But I didn't mean it. I wasn't trying to. It was a misunderstanding. I thought I was doing the right thing. They're too sensitive. They overreacted. They, other than me. Was I trying to be a villain on purpose? No. Were you? I hope not. But intention does not determine results, and we are all responsible for our results. Now, admitting we are villains will not miraculously solve everything. We are still flawed but relatable characters with our own goals, pursuits, and values that will not align with everyone around us. But it helps. It makes us aware. It makes us more conscious of our effect on the world around us, more aware of the adversity we create. And it makes us evaluate our ignorance, our apathy, our denial. And it makes us intentional with our words, our actions, our giving, our love, our vote. And it makes us admit where we were wrong, where we misspoke, where we made an assumption, where we didn't understand, and where we acted like villains. And it helps us be better to the heroes of the stories around us. We are all heroes, and we are all villains. Acknowledging this truth is not condemnation. It is the way forward. something powerful happens inside the human spirit when, rather than ignored, a person is seen. When, rather than dismissed, a voice is heard. Showing empathy, seeking understanding. This is the way towards true justice, towards peace and harmony with one another, with our planet, with all living things. We must make the choice to step outside the pages of our own paradigms and experiences and read one another's stories. I hope you'll join me. Happy reading.